Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's my pleasure to introduce you to every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 a.m. to interesting people in politics and business, in the arts and lifestyle, etc. And tonight is no different. I'm going to introduce you to the youngest candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party to run in the upcoming provincial election that's going to be held in June of 2022. Her name is Emile Leneveu. She is in Belleville, Quinte area. What's the riding called, Emily?
So the riding is Bay of Quinte, and I currently reside in Belleville, Ontario.
Fantastic. And you are the youngest candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party currently. Is that correct?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, I am the youngest. I believe there's another candidate that I know of under 30, and we're hoping to get 30 under 30. So hopefully lots of recruitment yet to be done on that front.
You've got, for someone that's under 30, and I won't ask you your actual age unless you want to volunteer it, but you've got a pretty impressive resume for someone that is under 30. Let me just tell people a little bit about it. You're an entrepreneur with a passion for equity, education, and the environment. You've studied in various fields from biotechnology to design thinking, project management, marketing, giving your unique perspective in a variety of industries. In 2018, you graduated as an advanced biotechnologist and valedictorian from Loyalist College. I understand that biotechnology was actually in cannabis or something like that. So I'm going to be interested to come back and talk to you about that. You believe that youth representation is required at all levels of governments and that sustainable practices and intersectional thinking are key policies to successful policy making. You were a Bay of Quinte and Canadian top 30 under 30. You're a director of the Quinte Regional Science and Technology Fair. You're a member of the Center for Workforce Development Board, and you're a youth advisor on the Educational Sector Committee of UNESCO. You're an advocate for positive mental well-being, and you're a speaker through jack.org. That's a pretty impressive resume for someone who's, what'd you say, 23?
Thank you. Yes, 23. Thank you so much. It's been a whirlwind, if you will, over the past few years, kind of getting ready to run in a 2022 election. I always kind of had sights on either this one or 2026. And when the opportunity presented itself and when the Liberal Party seemed so keen on gaining more people under the age of 30, I just knew it was the time to jump in. So yeah, really exciting. And thank you. Yeah, it's definitely.
Why are you so motivated to run?
I think for me, being a younger woman, always interested in politics and always interested in changing things, admittedly on the municipal level at first, that's definitely where I gained an affinity for politics. But again, I think as a woman in both sciences and politics, I want to see more representation, and I'd like to see more younger faces, both in the House of Commons and Legislative Assembly. So I think it's time to have more youth. Like I say in my bio, I think it's so imperative that we have that youth representation at all levels of governance to really thread the needle and help youth, but also help seniors and help every single marginalized community. I think youth can do a great job at recognizing those voices that need to be amplified and helping everyone in an equitable way.
Why? Tell me why.
I think as a marginalized voice, you almost gain a fire and a passion. And to be quite frank, sometimes you gain a little bit of anger that's changed into that passion, right? And I think by being marginalized and not seeing yourself at the table, there's a divide and a frustration of not understanding how to evolve and how to affect change on a societal or structural level. And I think by seeing those faces and realizing that youth or any marginalized voice can make a difference is ultimately what will allow us to affect change on a systemic level.
The counter to that would be you haven't really experienced life. You haven't been out in the real world. You haven't really seen what the line that you hear all the time about is you've never met a payroll.
Mm-hmm. I think to that I would say, you so kindly said that I had a good amount of things behind me on my resume. And I think a lot of youth surprisingly have so many things behind them because being in such a virtual era, and even before COVID-19, working in a virtual time, I think we luckily were able to task switch quite effectively. I won't say multitasking because that's a whole other thing that I don't want to get into, but something I studied was multitasking in my science field, and we can't actually multitask, fun fact, but I digress. But again, I think youth are excellent task switchers, and I think we do a good job at gaining the experience that's needed. But to counter that, I think something that we have, someone once told me, it's the audacity of inexperience, and I think that's something that sticks with me. I love that saying because it's true. Sometimes you need the audacity of inexperience to affect change and to create some positive change. And of course, we need the knowledge and expertise of people who have been there before us, and we would be silly to neglect that knowledge. But I do think by gaining as many perspectives as possible, youth do have the potential of affecting a great amount of change by being the face at the table with, of course, other individuals of all age groups.
So I'm a political junkie. It sounds like you probably are to a certain extent as well. We've just, witnessed in the United States two individuals over 70, 74 and 78 compete for the president position. The leader in the House, the leader in the Senate are both also in their 70s. What's going on such that, you're here talking about the audacity of inexperience and the power of youth and why youth has got to be represented. And yet so many of the leaders, maybe not in Canada, but in the United States, appear to be of generations, two generations above you, not above, earlier.
Yeah, I mean, structurally, or the hierarchy, if you will, in terms of age. But yeah, I think, to be honest, I don't know as much of the American side of politics in terms of my knowledge. It's definitely not as structured as my Canadian knowledge. But what I will say is I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of gaps and a lot of barriers that exist both in Canadian and American politics. And arguably, again, with my perhaps lack of knowledge in the American realm, I would say that they might have more barriers, I would say, to allowing for youth and all marginalized communities to enter politics. I think we still have barriers in the Canadian system, but I do think that Canada as a whole, especially Ontario as a province, is really working hard on reducing those barriers. For example, the Ontario Liberal Party, when you look at the fees for even running, something like $2,500 to run might not be possible for someone who's in their 20s or 19 or 18 who wants to run. So I think even when we're talking about monetary value and things like that, there's a lot of barriers that we've done, or there's a lot of barriers that Canada has reduced or has eliminated in ways by reducing those fees or helping individuals out. But I don't know if that's the case on the American side of things.
We're chatting tonight with Emile Leneveu, who is the candidate in the Bay of Quinte or is hoping to be the candidate for the Bay of Quinte for the Ontario Liberal Party in the upcoming provincial election in 2022. I understand that she is right now the only candidate that is nominated. So within a short period of time, she may be acclaimed to that position, which would be spectacular. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Emile in just a minute. Stay with us. We're chatting tonight. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour about youth in politics. And we've got on the line Emile Leneveu, who is the candidate for the Liberal Party, or hoping to be the candidate for the Liberal Party in Bay of Quinte, which is a riding, at the east end of Lake Ontario, just around Belleville before you get to Kingston. She is 23 years old. 23 years old, and she's going to be a candidate. I guess she'll be 25 or 24 by the time the election is held. She's going to be a candidate to become a member of provincial parliament. Emile, one of the reasons why parties sometimes say that they don't nominate more young people is because young people don't vote. Old people vote. And the statistics are, pretty astounding. And these aren't exact statistics, but it's something like over 80% of people over the age of 65 vote, and under 30% of the people under 30 vote. And so therefore, if your, base, the people that should most logically want to vote for you aren't voting anyway, you're not going to get the kind of support you need. What are we going to do to get more young people to get to the ballot box and vote?
Absolutely. And I think those are some unfortunately very negatively staggering statistics when it comes to the underrepresentation of youth that are showing up to the ballot box. But I think what's really important again is we aren't seeing faces that represent us in the running. We aren't seeing youth, or maybe we are now, or we're seeing more of youth now. I shouldn't say we aren't seeing any at all. But in the past two elections, I definitely didn't see as much youth representation or as much representation from BIPOC communities, for example. And I think that's why certain communities aren't voting like the youth vote, because they aren't seeing any representation. And the way to change that is by having more youth run. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the Ontario Liberal Party looking to recruit 30 individuals under 30. But again, I think it's all about that representation. The other thing I would say too is, as much as those statistics are unfortunately a little negative when you do look at how few people are voting under 30, the one thing I would say is the statistic does seem to be changing in an upward direction year over year. So every year we do seem to find more youth that are showing up to the ballot box, and I hope that continues. Maybe not even on the linear path that we have now, hopefully exponentially, as we see more youth and underrepresented faces at the table.
So in the U.S. election that just happened, 16% of the electorate was their first-time voters, and it wasn't just youth, but it was youth and minorities, et cetera, that were motivated to come out and vote. And and those 16% voted 75% for the Democrats, 25% for the Republicans. So if that 16% of new voters didn't show up, the analysis suggests that the Republicans would have won the presidency. In the two elections ago federally, there were significantly greater new people, both young people and ethnic people, that voted. And that's one of the reasons why Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister of Canada. And if the same group that had voted 4 years earlier had come out to vote, not all those new people, then Stephen Harper would have been successful as the Prime Minister. So there's something about motivating new people, both young and immigrants, new Canadians, et cetera, to vote, that's critically important for parties of the center left. Are you part of that ability to, that desire to recruit new people to the ballot box?
Absolutely.
How are you going to do it?
I never want to turn away voices and voters that we've spoken to in the past, obviously, but I am more than thrilled to talk to new people. And I think the how is just getting out there and starting to mobilize and create networks of youth and get people excited about things that they might not know about politics. I think it's really unfortunate that oftentimes when we discuss provincial politics, individuals will immediately snap into the federal realm, or they'll just assume that the two pillars of governments are the same, for example. And that's unfortunate. That I think there's a lack of education that I believe the young crowd can hopefully go to Zoom calls like this and bring that information to digital and virtual platforms. So again, I think it's the mobilization of youth and creating networks of people that get excited about politics because maybe they're finding new information or new tidbits or fun facts about politics that they never knew before. So I think for me, it's all about mobilizing youth and not only youth, marginalized communities, BIPOC communities as well.
So I happen to believe it's personalities that people feel connected to and policies that people feel connected to. And you're extremely articulate. And I would encourage you, even though you say you don't know a lot about what's going on in the United States, I'd encourage you to take a look at AOC and a young congressperson from New York who's been able to motivate people both with what she says, but also how she says it. And I think that that's critically important. And I think Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was able to do that 6 years ago. I'm not sure if he was as successful in doing that, a year and a half ago or a year and a bit ago when he only won a minority. You've got the 4 E's as sort of the subplot on your campaign and your LinkedIn: education, equity, environment, and entrepreneurship. Tell me why these 4 different E words.
So they've kind of evolved throughout. Honestly, I think I think the first time that I jotted them down, I remember jotting down education, environment, and I think it was empowerment at that time. And it was something like grade 6 or grade 7 when I first kind of got the bug and an affinity for politics. And I remember saying to myself, at some point, I want to run. I think at that point I was really focused on being a school board trustee. That was kind of my end goal, if you will. And then for a while, my career path was I want to be prime minister. And then I kind of got really, really interested in municipal politics when I entered post-secondary education. So for me, I think the biggest thing has always just been being true to myself and knowing that education is something that's always been close to me. The environment is something that I've been passionate about since I could remember. I think the first magazine I ever read was a Chickadee magazine, and it was all about the 5 things you can do to increase or to improve your environmental footprint. So I remember going to school and telling everyone to brush their teeth less and like all of those fun things. So honestly, those pillars and those words started when I was really young and kind of had the fun cutesy side of I want E words because my name starts with an E. But then when I became as I grew older, I realized, well, these 3 and now 4, if not 5 pillars still are the key passions and the things that I'm most interested in. So I think they started out as fun childhood dreams and now have become my core passions and my core values.
So one of them is environment, and some people are feeling, after this pandemic, or we're still obviously in it, that they're getting tired of a lot of things. And are we going to have time and money and attention in our minds for dealing with the environment? Maybe some people just want to get back to work and make some money after they've lost jobs, lost businesses, had to take wage cuts, layoffs, furloughs, et cetera, during the last couple of months. When we come out of this, the other side, aren't people just going to want to make some money and get back to work rather than be focused on the environment? How are you going to get people's attention back on the environment?
Absolutely. And I think that plays to over the course of history, every time we've seen a dip in the economy or a plague or any kind of medical problem, you always see the environment taking a peak upwards because life as we know it kind of stops for all intents and purposes with this pandemic. But then as soon as things end or as soon as a recession ends, the environment always is the first thing to take a dip. So I think that's something that's definitely on my radar and something that I really want to focus on is just implementing simple ways of continuing this virtualization era or continuing this way of reducing a physical need to consume and to start consuming in a virtual way. And I think that'll really help the environment. And there's a plethora of studies on the virtualization of work. And I think once we go back to work, I'm really hoping that as a government, we can implement ways of going back to work in the most smart, efficient way when it comes to the environment. And I think there's ways of doing that are very comfortable for everyone and still boost the economy and still boost entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship is also something I'm very passionate about. And I realize that the environment and entrepreneurship don't always go hand in hand, or we might not think they always go hand in hand. But quite frankly, I think they do. And that's something that we can start to instill through education.
Do you believe in carbon taxes?
I do. I am a firm believer in carbon taxing, yes.
What about alternative energy, wind power, solar power, etc.?
I do believe in alternative energy. That being said, I wouldn't say that I'm perhaps as firm as a believer as one might think because I'm a youth. I think oftentimes individuals may believe that youth are very pro alternative energy when it comes to solar and wind. And I think we're starting to take a step back and really investigate and research, well, how good is solar energy and what happens to these solar panels and these batteries afterwards? What landfills are they going into? And I think my generation and all generations really are doing a really great job right now at kind of taking a step back and realizing that perhaps solar and wind, to be honest, might not be the best alternatives. At least I don't think they are. But there's a lot of research to be done with other alternatives that may be seen as less renewable than solar and wind. But I think there's a happy medium between what we have now and no fossil fuels whatsoever for the next 10 years.
So Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, is said that he's against carbon taxes and is fighting it tooth and nail, both in the political sphere as well as the legal sphere, against the federal government's desire for carbon taxes. And he's defunded a bunch of alternative energy programs for clean energy, wind and solar, et cetera. If you were standing up in Queen's Park, if you're successful and you were asked to state something about the environment to the premier, what would you tell him?
I think it's very unfortunate that we're removing these programs when people like myself have benefited from the programs. Under the Wynne administration, I purchased a Chevrolet Volt at the age of 21 years old. I don't think anyone would think that a 21-year-old could purchase a $50,000 car, but it was completely possible and aided the environment with these programs that unfortunately have been removed. I think it's imperative for the economy that we implement these programs again so that our economy can fix the environment itself, and we don't have to focus on the environment. We can focus on our individuals, our people, our long-term care, and our health. And I think it's imperative that we allow the environment to really work on itself through the economy by allowing for these structures to implement themselves based on what scientists and economic individuals and professionals have said for decades, and based on research that has existed for decades. And I think it's really important that we start to go back to our researchers, go back to our scientists, and actually listen to these professionals.
I understand. I Googled you a little bit and did some research. I understand that you actually focused in your biotechnology on cannabis and then did some work in cannabis. Tell me what that was.
Correct. So when I graduated from the biotechnology program, that summer, Loyalist College announced the first ever cannabis applied science postgraduate certificate. So the first collegiate certificate in Canada focusing on the science side of cannabis. So a postgrad to the biotechnology piece. So I was able to work upon the skills that I had already gained within the biosciences, working on my laboratory skills, and I was able to gain knowledge both on the marketing side, the regulation side, and of course the scientific analysis side of cannabis. And I was honored to be part of the first ever cohort of a Canadian applied science cannabis program. And through that, I met with licensed producers, Tweed, for example, in Smith Falls, that's nearby. I met with a licensed producer in Barrie, closer to you, Meta Farms, and countless licensed producers that are really excited to see what can happen for the cannabis industry, for the economy over the next century. Because realistically, we have to remember that cannabis is a century behind alcohol, and it's interesting to kind of see the different prohibition periods, if you will, and how they'll measure up. And I think cannabis has already, because of technology, has already kind of fallen leaps and bounds past what alcohol was able to do 2 years past prohibition, if you will. So it's a really exciting, flourishing industry, and it was amazing to be a part of both the science side and the marketing side, and that's kind of what spearheaded me into my career today as a marketer.
Do you think Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, was right in decriminalizing, legalizing marijuana?
I believe that the Prime Minister was 100% correct in that it was time to legalize cannabis, and I'm happy that our Liberal government of Canada was able to do that in 2018.
The cannabis industry in Ontario is not nearly as successful as it is in Alberta. The regulatory environment, both from a provincial standpoint as well as a municipal standpoint, is extremely different. If you were in front of Premier Doug Ford, if you're successful and you're in Queen's Park, what would you tell him about the way that he's been managing the introduction of cannabis in Ontario?
I would simply ask Premier Ford why we are handling the cannabis industry in the same way that we've been handling the alcohol and gaming commission, because I think cannabis is 100 years behind alcohol, and we can't just apply the same formula and the same platform to an industry that's in its infancy. And I believe that we need to stop trying to monetize it in a lottery-based system as we did in its infancy. And we really need to create a new structure, as Alberta did and as BC did. I think it's really imperative that we don't just go one for one with the alcohol industry. And we recognize that this is an industry that's in its infancy, and we have a lot of fantastic scientists and researchers out west that we can learn from. And I think it's time that we collaborate with our other provinces.
The Liberal government and Premier Wynne were reasonably progressive, and they went down to one of the worst defeats in Ontario political history. Why and what are you going to do different that's going to attract people to vote for the Liberal Party now?
I think being in a rebuilding stage, and I think what happened in that election was very unfortunate. I think a series of unfortunate events created a relatively unprecedented situation, and I was obviously very saddened to see what happened with the falling of the Wynne administration. But I also think that this is an opportunity for marginalized communities, for youth, for all generations to continue to be progressive, but perhaps to do so in a more collaborative way, ensuring that, not to say that I believe the Wynne administration was extremely collaborative, but I think what we can do is perhaps learn from the differences of opinions that were had during that time period, and realize that we really do need to come from a place of collaboration. And I'm a firm believer in our current democratic system, but I also do think that there's room for party politics to maybe change a little in terms of the landscape, if I can be so radical. And I think collaboration is imperative, and there's a systemic change that needs to happen there.
Well, I'm going to be interested in what you've got to suggest on that, but we need to take a break. So we're going to take a break and come back in just a minute with Emile Leneveu, who is the candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party in Bay of Quinte. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back. We're having an interesting conversation tonight on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour with Emile Leneveu, who is the candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party in the Bay of Quinte. She is the youngest candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party. She's 23 years old. She wants to replace a cabinet minister and become the member of provincial parliament. She thinks that the Ontario Liberal Party is going to actually have 30 candidates under the age of 30, which is kind of interesting. And she thinks that even though she's got a very impressive resume for someone that's 23, she's only 23, and she thinks that she deserves to be elected an MPP, go to Queen's Park, and represent the riding of Bay of Quinte. And so it's kind of aggressive and kind of encouraging at the same time. Emile, you were saying that you want more collaboration and you're going to change the framework of party politics. Big idealistic words. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, again, I don't think I'm by any means the final answer expert on this one, but I think it's really time for some structural change. I think we're in an unfortunate situation where I don't think we're quite as polarized as our southern border, if I may, in that the right is always pulling the left and the left is always pulling the right, and we're pulling each other, I think, further and further away. Again, I don't think it's gotten as bad as it is currently to the south, but we're on that path, and I think it's really scary to see what some of our parties are starting to look like, and how both parties used to be, I think, about progression, but also about conserving the environment, and also about just giving back to the people and having value in an individual. And I think, unfortunately, by pulling each other away from ourselves and from our parties, or further along the spectrum, we're creating some really polarizing views. And in some provinces, it's, I think, for me as a woman of science who thinks logically and who is very centric, it's getting kind of scary to see how far both sides are being pulled. So again, I don't have the end all answer, or I'm not the final expert on this one, but I think it's time for systemic change. I don't know what that looks like specifically, but I think everyone needs to get into a room, parties aside, and we need to figure out whether it's is it first past the post that's the problem? Is it the ranked ballot system that we need to reincorporate? Whatever it may be. Again, I don't think those are the final answer. I think it's going to be a mix of a variety of things, but it's really time for some structural and
enough to be acclaimed,
change.
Or hopefully will be acclaimed. But if you had gone in a contested nomination, you would have been elected not by a first by the post, but by a priority vote system. And just to remind people, the way a priority vote system is, the person that's going to win has got to get 50.1% of the votes. And if you don't get 50.1% on the first ballot, there's successive ballots to get to the 50.1%. If that's the way we elect the nominees for the parties, if that's the way we elect the leaders, because that's the way that Stephen Del Duca was elected leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, why is that not the way it makes sense for us to elect either municipal people? Because Doug Ford, as you know, just outlawed priority voting, ranked voting the last couple of weeks, and or in provincial or federal government?
Honestly, that's a great question, and I think my only answer to that is, again, why not? I think, again, I don't know if that's the final answer, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's something that we should really strive to achieve, because I think it is right now the fairest way that I see anyone being elected.
You know, it's interesting because I interviewed the new leader of the Green Party of Canada, and she
Fantastic.
was elected on the 8th ballot. And
Hmm.
it's interesting when it goes past a ballot or two, um, the principle changes, and it comes to your sort of systemic change. The person that's going to be successful is the person who makes friends with other candidates, because you know that you're going to need other candidates and their supporters to come to you in successive ballots. If you think you can win on the first ballot, either because you can get over 50% on the first ballot or because it's a first past the post, what you want to do is suppress the vote for other people, frankly insult them, and try to motivate your base to come out. So if you want systemic change and you want people to work together and you want people to collaborate, priority voting might be one of your solutions.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. Absolutely.
One of the other things that has been recommended recently is lowering the voting age to 16 and getting half of all the
Mm.
people half of all people to vote their first time in high school, because, they'd be 16, 17, 18. What do you think about that? Are 16 and 17-year-olds ready to vote?
That's a tough question. To be honest, I'm kind of very back and forth. I know when I was 16, I was very much of the opinion that I needed to vote and I didn't understand why. But to be completely honest, I do think that 18 is a good age. That being said, I think we need to do a better job as younger candidates of getting those 18-year-olds out to vote and getting those 20-year-olds out to vote, or getting anyone under the age of 30 out to vote. I think that's our answer right now. And if that doesn't work, let's bring the 16-year-old in. But to be completely honest, I think 18 is a good age. I do think that
Why?
I don't know. I think, again, when I was 16, I was very adamant that I'm mature enough, I'm old enough, I can make these decisions. But to be honest, at 16, I don't think anyone in my circle, even if we did have an affinity for politics, truly knew what was at stake. And I don't want to discredit youth, and I don't want to discredit anyone younger than me, but I do think that there's something to be said about that age of 18 for a variety of decision making factors, if you will, or decision making, or decisions really, or life milestones. I do think there's something to be said about that adult mark that we've set for a variety of reasons, for research, from research. But yeah, I think definitely a difficult question. Don't want to discount anyone younger than me, but for right now, I would personally leave it at 18. I just think we need to do a better job as younger candidates of actually getting those 18-year-olds out to vote.
Well, I hope you can do a far better job of motivating those people that are 18, 19, 20, and 65, 75, 85 out to vote. So congratulations on your acclamation, hopefully to come within the next 2 weeks, and good luck in the upcoming election. If people are motivated by this conversation and want to donate to you or help you out, or if they're actually in the Bay of Quinte and want to take a sign, do you have a website that they can go to?
Absolutely. We would love to have your help, donations, volunteer, whatever it may be, with our riding association. And my website is BOQ, so for the Bay of Quinte, so BOQ Emily, EMILIE.ca. So BOQEmily.ca.
Well, BOQ Emily Leneveu, candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party for the Bay of Quinte, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's our show for tonight. Thanks, everybody. Good night.